The scent of unnoticed mornings, a bruised purple smudge against the horizon, barely visible through the bakery's tall windows, announced the impending dawn. Inside, Milo Thorne moved with a practiced grace, a phantom in the warm, yeasty air. His flour-dusted hands worked dough on the worn wooden counter, a rhythmic thudding, the sole sound in the quiet space. The scent of fermenting yeast and rich butter began to unfold, a comforting embrace against the nascent day's chill. He'd been up for hours, the industrial mixer long silenced, the first loaves already proofing. He glanced up as a familiar silhouette passed the window. Officer Brandon Cole. A creature of precise habit, Brandon's patrol invariably brought him past the daily crumb at this hour. A mechanical, almost ritualistic passage. Milo observed him, a quiet witness to the officer's disciplined stride. The crisp set of his uniform even in the dim light. Brandon's gaze remained fixed ahead, an intensity speaking of unwavering duty. He never looked in. Not once. Milo often wondered if Brandon even registered the bakery's presence, the sweet, thick aroma, potent enough to cling to the air, seemed to dissipate before reaching the officer's vigilant nose. It was an unnoticed morning. Every morning. A small, indefinable pang settled in Milo's chest. Not sadness precisely, but a quiet acknowledgement of the vast chasm between their worlds. He slid a tray of croissants into the oven, the blast of heat a welcome warmth on his face. The pale, soft pastry would soon transform into a deep golden brown, their buttery fragrance permeating every corner. He imagined the simple pleasure of biting into one, the delicate crunch giving way to a soft interior. He wished he could share that unspoken language of freshly baked goods, but the morning's solitary ritual belonged to him alone. Outside, Brandon Cole's boots crunched on the damp pavement. His breath plumed in the cool air, a transient cloud against the emerging sky. His eyes methodically scanned storefronts and the empty street, a mental checklist ticking off. The old hardware store, the closed diner, the darkened real estate office. Every detail registered, every anomaly noted. His mind was a finely tuned instrument, calibrated for vigilance. A broken window, a misplaced trash can, a lingering shadow. These were the things that commanded his attention. He passed the corner where an unassuming bakery stood, its windows dark save for the faint interior glow. He didn't register it specifically as a bakery, merely another structure on his route, part of the static backdrop of his early morning patrols. He certainly didn't notice the warm, inviting aroma beginning to seep from beneath its door, the subtle promise of cinnamon and sugar mingling with the earthy notes of sourdough. His focus remained on the street ahead, the alleyways to his left, the distant hum of an approaching delivery truck. A stray cat darted across his path, a flash of black against the gray street. Brandon's eyes tracked it for a moment, a brief diversion before returning to his patrol. The world was slowly, hesitantly waking. Soon coffee shops would open, paper deliveries begin, and the town would stir. But for now, it was his, a quiet realm he traversed with purpose. Milo watched Brandon disappear around the bend. A barely audible sigh escaped his lips. The quiet baker, whose hands kneaded magic from flour and water, remained a ghost to the disciplined officer. The bakery, a beacon of warmth and comfort, remained unseen. It was a silent ballet, two men moving through the same space, yet utterly separate. Milo turned back to his work, the rhythmic tapping of his knife against a cutting board breaking the silence once more. The first batch of bread was ready. The day had truly begun, even if some of its most delicious moments remained entirely unnoticed. The soft thrum beneath his own heart echoed the quiet ache in his chest. Perhaps one day the scent would reach him. Perhaps one day he would look in. A quiet offering. The rain had been a persistent whisper all night, but by dawn it had found its voice, drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof of Brandon's cruiser. He'd just finished an early shift, the kind that left a phantom ache behind his eyes, and was looking forward to the quiet hum of his own apartment. But fate, it seemed, had other plans, announced by a sickening thud and a sudden lurch in the steering. He wrestled the car to the curb, the hiss of escaping air a mournful counterpoint to the rain. A flat, of all the mornings. He sighed, pushing open the heavy door. The cool, damp air immediately permeated his uniform, a stark contrast to the sterile warmth of the car's interior. He knelt, hands already gritty from the damp road, and peered at the deflated tire. It was a goner. As he straightened, wiping a streak of grime from his cheek, he realized where he'd stopped. Milo's Bakery. The warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread, usually so comforting, now seemed almost mocking, a reminder of the breakfast he wouldn't be having anytime soon. Inside the bakery, Milo watched, a quiet acknowledgement settling in his chest. Officer Cole, soaked and frustrated, wrestling with a flat tire. It was a scene so mundane, yet to Milo, it felt like a brief, accidental overlap of their vastly different orbits. He saw the set of Brandon's jaw, the disciplined efficiency even in annoyance, and a quiet pang resonated within him, a recognition of the chasm between the orderly world of an officer and the flour-dusted calm of a baker. A customer, he realized, wouldn't stand out there in the rain for long, not with the promise of warm coffee and sweet indulgence just steps away. But Brandon was different. He was a man who fixed things, who took responsibility, even for a deflated tire on a dreary morning. Without a second thought, Milo moved. He poured a steaming mug of coffee, the dark liquid swirling with cream, and selected a cinnamon roll, its spirals glistening with glaze. He placed them carefully on a small disposable tray. He didn't want to intrude, to offer overt sympathy that might feel like pity. He simply wanted to offer a small comfort, a silent gesture of goodwill. He pushed open the bakery door, the bell above chiming softly, a sound that usually heralded a sale but now felt like a quiet announcement. Brandon, grunting as he wrestled with the lug nuts, didn't immediately notice. Milo walked to the front of the cruiser, where Brandon's spare tire lay, still wrapped in its protective plastic. He bent, carefully placing the tray on the hood of the car, just beside the windshield wiper. The steam from the coffee plumed gently in the cold air. He retreated, not waiting for thanks, not wanting to make it an exchange. As he reached the sanctuary of the bakery door, he glanced back. Brandon had finally straightened, his hands on his hips surveying his progress. His gaze lifted, first to the steam, then to the coffee and pastry. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by something else, a softening almost. He looked up directly at the bakery window and caught Milo's eye. Milo offered a small, shy smile, a subtle curve of his lips. Brandon, still holding the wrench, returned it, a slow, unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't the polite nod he usually received from strangers, nor the quick professional glance. This was different. This was a quiet offering, a moment of unexpected kindness that cut through the damp chill of the morning and settled somewhere deep inside him. He watched Milo disappear back into the bakery's golden glow, the lingering scent of cinnamon and coffee suddenly more potent. The flat tire still needed changing, but a strange, pleasant shift had occurred, making the task feel less burdensome, less isolated. He picked up the warm mug, the heat seeping into his chilled fingers, and took a slow, appreciative sip. The first acknowledgement. The familiar aroma of dark roast and rising dough, usually a comforting embrace in Milo's mornings, carried a sharper edge today, laced with an unexpected thrum of anticipation. He polished the glass display case, the rhythmic clink of ceramic mugs from the espresso machine his sole companion, when the bell above the door announced an arrival. His hand froze. It was Brandon, not in his crisp uniform, an immediate surprise, but in a simple, dark t-shirt that subtly defined his shoulders and well-worn jeans. He seemed softer somehow, divested of the angular demands of duty. Brandon approached the counter with a measured tread, his gaze typically sweeping, now focused intently on the tiered display of pastries. He cleared his throat. "Morning, Milo." The name, unburdened by rank or formality, felt like a small, unexpected gift. "Morning, Brandon," Milo managed, his voice a shade breathier than intended. He gestured toward the coffee machine. "Just coffee today?" Brandon nodded, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. "Yeah, just coffee. And maybe one of those blueberry scones." He indicated a basket of golden, crumbly pastries. Milo reached for a scone, his movements feeling oddly deliberate under Brandon's unwavering gaze. As he slipped it into a bag, a familiar warmth unfurled within him, a quiet hum beneath his ribs. This encounter felt distinctly different from their last. which had been dictated by the urgency of a flat tire. This was unscripted, almost domestic. Milo presented the bag and the steaming cup. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt up Milo's arm. Brandon took a sip, his brow furrowing slightly, as if lost in thought. Milo waited, sensing an unspoken prelude. Brandon set the cup down. "Look," he began, his voice a little gruff, "about the other day. The pastry you left in my car." He met Milo's eyes directly, his usually inscrutable gaze holding a flicker of something akin to embarrassment. I appreciate it. It was really good. Didn't expect it." A blush crept up Milo's neck, spreading across his cheeks. He hadn't anticipated Brandon mentioning it, let alone expressing gratitude. "It was nothing," he mumbled, waving a dismissive hand, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Just thought you might need something after everything." Brandon offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Still, thanks, Milo." He picked up his coffee again, his gaze lingering a moment too long on Milo's face before dropping to the counter. The air between them, already thick with implication, grew taut, vibrating with an invisible energy. Milo found himself holding his breath, waiting. For what, he wasn't sure. A deeper conversation? A shared laugh? The acknowledgement of this shared moment, however small, felt monumental. Brandon took another long sip of coffee, the silence stretching. He seemed to wrestle with something, a fleeting expression of confusion crossing his features before his usual composure settled. He shifted his weight, a subtle movement, but one that signaled an imminent departure. "Well," he said, his voice a little steadier now, "I should get going. Thanks again for the coffee and the scone." He picked up the bag, his eyes meeting Milo's one last time. This time there was a flicker of something Milo couldn't quite decipher, a brief, questioning glance, before Brandon turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed again, marking his exit, leaving Milo in the sudden, palpable quiet. He watched Brandon through the window, saw him get into his patrol car, even off duty, it seemed. The vehicle was a constant, and drive away. The scent of coffee and yeast still hung in the air, but now, mixed with it, was a faint, almost imperceptible trace of something else, something new and undeniably thrilling. The chasm between their worlds, Milo realized, had perhaps, for a brief moment, narrowed just enough for a single, hesitant acknowledgement to bridge it. And Milo, for the first time in a long time, felt a quiet, hopeful pang. Noticing the details. The rhythmic thud of Brandon's boots on the pavement was usually the only sound that broke the pre-dawn quiet of Elm Street, a solitary drumbeat accompanying his thoughts. For weeks, those thoughts had been a jumbled mess of precinct reports, patrol routes, and the nagging feeling that something, though he couldn't name it, was shifting. Now, however, there was another sound, a faint clatter that began to weave itself into his morning ritual. It emanated from the softly glowing interior of the Daily Crumb, and it was almost always Milo. Brandon had, up until recently, barely registered the bakery beyond its location on his route. It was just another storefront, another point on a grid. But lately, as the sky began its slow transition from indigo to steel gray, he found his gaze drawn to the figure within. Milo Thorne wasn't flamboyant in his movements. There was a quiet efficiency to him. Brandon would be walking past, and through the steamed-up window, he'd see Milo with his back to the street, flour dusting his dark hair, meticulously kneading dough. Or he'd catch a glimpse of him carefully arranging trays of unbaked goods, each motion precise and unhurried. It started subtly. A slight turn of the head as he passed, a momentary linger of his eyes on the bakery's entrance. Then, one Tuesday, as Brandon rounded the corner of Maple and Elm, he saw Milo outside. The air was still cool, promising a warm day, and Milo was bent over the flower boxes that flanked the bakery's entrance. He held a small green watering can, its spout arcing a gentle stream over the petunias and marigolds. There was a tenderness in the way he tended to them, a slow, almost reverent touch as he plucked a single withered leaf. Brandon watched for a beat longer than necessary, the scene imprinting itself with surprising clarity. He cleared his throat, a small, involuntary sound that made Milo straighten up, his head turning. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Milo's, a soft brown. Brandon's, a more intense blue, before Milo offered a small, almost shy smile, and Brandon, caught off guard, merely nodded before continuing his patrol. The next morning the pattern repeated, but with a different focus. Brandon was walking a little slower, his internal radar tuned differently. He saw Milo through the large display window, meticulously placing fresh pastries onto tiered stands. Each croissant was angled just so, each muffin nestled perfectly in its paper cup. It wasn't just arranging, it was curating, an artist's attention to detail. Brandon found himself slowing to a near stop, his gaze following Milo's hands as they worked, nimble and precise. He noticed the slight furrow in Milo's brow as he contemplated the placement of a particularly golden bear claw. The small, satisfied sigh when the display was complete. A quiet pang of something he couldn't quite identify echoed within Brandon. He'd always prided himself on his own attention to detail in his work, the subtle signs of a break-in, the nuances of a witness's testimony. But Milo's details were different. They were about creation, about beauty, about offering a small moment of comfort in the day. It was a stark contrast to Brandon's world of rules and regulations, of order maintained through force. The chasm between them, once an unacknowledged gulf, now felt like a canyon, and for the first time Brandon found himself wondering what it would be like to stand on the other side. He walked on, the scent of warm bread and sugar now clinging to the morning air, a new, unfamiliar sweetness on his usual route. A shared moment of help. The late afternoon sun cast long, lazy shadows across the cobblestone street, painting the store fronts in hues of warm gold and deep amber. Brandon, on his usual beat, found his rhythm broken by an insistent, high-pitched wailing. It wasn't the usual urban cacophony, but something sharper, more desperate. He scanned the street, his gaze snagging on a knot of worried onlookers gathered near a sycamore tree a few doors down from Thorne's bakery. As he approached, the source of the distress became clear. A scrawny tabby cat, its fur a mottled gray and white, clung precariously to a high branch, its claws seemingly fused with the bark. The poor creature looked utterly terrified, its wide green eyes reflecting the fading light. Brandon recognized the cat. It was the same one he'd occasionally seen slinking around the alley behind the bakery, often vanishing just as Milo emerged with a small bowl in hand. A woman in a vibrant floral dress was calling up to it, her voice a soothing but ineffectual coo. Another man, attempting a brave climb, had managed only a few feet before retreating, muttering about brittle branches and a fear of heights. Brandon assessed the situation. The branch was high, too high for a simple reach, and the cat was clearly too frightened to jump, even with tempting offers of tuna-scented encouragement. He moved to the base of the tree, his presence immediately commanding a respectful silence from the small crowd. "Anyone tried to get a ladder?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "No one has one tall enough, officer," offered the woman in floral, wringing her hands. "Poor Mittens has been up there for almost an hour." Brandon looked up, gauging the distance. "Mittens, huh?" He took off his uniform jacket, folding it carefully and placing it on a nearby bench. He loosened his tie, then began to climb, his movements deliberate and efficient. His years of physical training, usually applied to more human-centric emergencies, now found a feline target. The sycamore's bark was rough against his palms, providing good grip, and he tested each branch before putting his full weight on it. The cat, seeing his approach, let out another mournful cry, pressing itself flatter against the branch. "Easy there, Mittens," Brandon murmured, his voice softer than he usually allowed himself to be in public. "Just trying to help you down." He edged closer, slowly, extending a hand palm open and empty. He spoke in low, reassuring tones. a gentle current beneath the surface of his usual authoritative cadence. The cat, wary but exhausted, watched him, its tail twitching. He managed to get within arm's reach, but the cat, still terrified, wouldn't budge. Then, from the doorway of Thorne's bakery, a familiar figure emerged. Milo, flour dusting his dark apron, held a small glazed ceramic bowl. He didn't speak, didn't join the onlookers, but simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the tree. Brandon caught his eye for a fleeting moment. Milo's face, usually serene and somewhat distant, was etched with concern. He held up the bowl slightly, a silent offering. Brandon understood. He carefully reached out, accepting the bowl from Milo's extended hand without a word. The baker's fingers were warm against his, a brief, unexpected contact. He could smell the faintest hint of warm cinnamon and something else, something sweet and yeasty, clinging to Milo's clothes. "Hey, Mittens," Brandon said, holding the bowl of tuna up to the cat. "Look what Milo brought you." He kept his voice even, his movements slow and predictable. The scent of fish was irresistible. Slowly, tentatively, the cat began to uncurl. It edged towards the bowl, sniffing cautiously, then took a delicate lick. Once its attention was fixated on the food, Brandon seized the opportunity. With a swift, gentle motion, he scooped the cat up, tucking it securely against his chest. It let out a startled mewl, but didn't struggle, too engrossed in its unexpected meal. Carefully, Brandon descended the tree, the cat now purring faintly, its tiny claws kneading his uniform shirt. He handed Mittens over to the waiting woman, who showered him with effusive thanks. As the crowd dispersed, he turned to Milo, who was still standing in his doorway, the empty ceramic bowl now cradled in his hands. Milo's eyes, usually a calm, almost neutral gray, were soft, filled with a quiet gratitude that transcended mere words. It was a look that settled deep within Brandon, a warmth he hadn't anticipated. Milo offered a small, shy smile, a rare curve of his lips that transformed his face. "Thank you, Officer Cole," he said, his voice a soft murmur that was almost lost in the street noise, yet somehow crystal clear to Brandon. "Just doing my job, Milo," Brandon replied, retrieving his jacket. But it felt like more than that. It felt like a shared moment. A small thread spun between them, and Brandon found himself lingering for a second longer than necessary, caught in the quiet intensity of Milo's gaze. The baker turned, disappearing back into the comforting warmth of his shop, leaving Brandon with a lingering impression of soft eyes and gentle gratitude, a feeling that resonated in his chest long after he resumed his patrol. The street, once just a series of points on his route, now held a new, compelling focal point. Lingering looks and quiet chats. The crisp morning air, once merely a backdrop to Brandon's patrol, began to carry a different weight. What started as a perfunctory nod to Milo Thorne at the bakery door had slowly morphed into a brief exchange, then a slightly longer one. He found himself lingering, his gaze drifting from the freshly polished brass of the bakery sign to the man behind the counter. "Morning, Milo," Brandon would offer, leaning against the door frame, a gesture he'd never allowed himself before. Milo would look up, a faint smile touching his lips. Officer Cole, another clear day. Their conversations, initially confined to observations about the weather or a recent town council meeting, began to stretch. Brandon found himself asking about the upcoming summer festival preparations, or the progress on the old clock tower restoration, knowing full well Milo would have the most up-to-date, if quietly delivered information. He'd catch glimpses of Milo's hands, dusted with flour like fine snow, moving with an almost reverent tenderness as he arranged loaves on cooling racks. Each movement was precise, economical, yet imbued with a subtle grace that belied the rugged work. One Tuesday, after a particularly late call-out, Brandon felt a weariness in his bones that even strong coffee hadn't touched. He walked into the bakery, the aroma of cinnamon and yeast, a comforting embrace. Milo was behind the counter, humming softly to himself, a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate with the warmth of the ovens. It wasn't a tune Brandon recognized, but it was soothing, a gentle counterpoint to the usual morning cacophony of his patrol car radio. Milo looked up, his eyes the color of warm honey meeting Brandon's. "Rough night, Officer Cole?" Milo's voice was soft, laced with genuine concern. Brandon felt a strange warmth spread through him. No one else ever asked, not really. They just saw the uniform. "A long one, yeah. Couple of rowdy teenagers and a lost cat." He managed a tired smile. Milo chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "The cat was found, I hope." "Eventually. Stuck up old Mrs. Henderson's oak tree." Brandon watched as Milo carefully placed a tray of golden brown croissants in the display case, his fingers brushing the delicate pastries as if they were fragile treasures. He noticed the slight sheen of perspiration on Milo's brow, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across it, and a surprising urge to reach out and brush it back flickered through him. He quickly quelled the thought, adjusting his belt. "You're here early," Brandon observed, the words a little more abrupt than he intended. Milo shrugged, turning back to him. "Always. Doe waits for no one." He paused, then offered, "Coffee's fresh. On me today." Brandon hesitated. He usually paid, insisted on it, but the weariness won. "Thanks, Milo, that'd be good." He watched Milo move, fetching a mug, the clinking of ceramic against ceramic, a quiet punctuation in the otherwise soft hum of the bakery. Milo's movements were efficient, yet never rushed. There was a deliberate care in everything he did, whether pouring coffee or arranging a display. It was a stark contrast to Brandon's own world, where urgency and swift decisions were the norm. As he sipped the hot, dark liquid, Brandon found himself observing Milo again, more closely this time. The way his brow furrowed in concentration as he checked the temperature of a proofing dough, the slight tremor in his hand as he carefully scored a baguette. Milo wasn't loud or flashy, but there was a quiet strength about him, a steadfast dedication to his craft that Brandon found unexpectedly compelling. "Those look good," Brandon said, gesturing vaguely toward the still warm bread. Milo followed his gaze. "They'll be perfect by the time the morning rush starts." He offered a small, almost shy smile. "Hard to beat fresh-baked bread, isn't it?" Brandon nodded, a feeling of contentment settling over him that was unusual for a Tuesday morning. He realized he was no longer just making conversation. He was genuinely enjoying Milo's company. The quiet rhythm of the bakery, the gentle cadence of Milo's voice. These lingering looks and quiet chats were becoming a small, essential part of his day, a subtle shift in the carefully ordered routine of his life. And as he eventually pushed away from the counter, bidding Milo farewell, Brandon carried with him not just the taste of good coffee, but a burgeoning appreciation for the baker's quiet charm, a charm that was slowly, imperceptibly, weaving itself into the fabric of his thoughts. A glimpse of understanding. The sharp scent of burning plastic, acrid and unwelcome, sliced through the usual morning aroma of brewing coffee and fresh pastries. Milo, mid-kneed, paused, his hands coated in flour. A faint crackling sound, like dry leaves scuttling across pavement, followed. He glanced towards the alley beside the bakery, a narrow strip of asphalt that usually only harbored overflowing bins and the occasional stray cat. The crackling grew louder, punctuated by a series of sharp pops. A wisp of dark smoke, thin as a pencil line, curled skyward from the alley's mouth. Milo's heart gave a jolt. He wiped his hands on a nearby towel, leaving white streaks, and hurried to the back door. Peeking out, he saw flames licking greedily at an overturned dumpster, the plastic contents inside melting into a grotesque, bubbling mass. The fire wasn't large, not yet, but it pulsed with an unsettling energy, threatening to spread to the adjacent wooden fence. Just then, a blur of dark blue appeared, moving with practiced urgency. Brandon Cole, his face grim, was already there, pulling a fire extinguisher from the side of his patrol car. He moved with an efficient grace, assessing the situation in a single sweep before aiming the nozzle at the base of the burgeoning blaze. The white chemical spray hissed, battling the orange inferno, but the heat radiating from the dumpster was intense, pushing Brandon back a step. The fire stubbornly held its ground in places, clinging to the deepest folds of the melting plastic. Milo didn't hesitate. He rushed back into the bakery, grabbing a stack of bottled water from the cooler. He'd seen enough small emergencies in this town to know that responders, even for a minor incident, always appreciated a cold drink. When he returned, a full-size fire truck was pulling up, its sirens now silent, and 2 firefighters were quickly deploying a hose. Brandon, a sheen of sweat on his brow, was still working the extinguisher, his movements precise and relentless. "Officer Cole! Firefighters!" Milo called out, carefully approaching the edge of the alley. "I brought some water." Brandon glanced over, his eyes, usually so guarded, softening for a fraction of a second before returning to the task at hand. One of the firefighters, a burly man with a soot-smudged face, gave Milo a grateful nod and took a bottle. The hose gushed, a powerful stream of water hitting the remaining flames, transforming the angry orange into a cloud of steam and smoke. The stench of wet ash and scorched plastic permeated the air, a stark contrast to the bakery's usual sweet perfume. As the last embers flickered and died, leaving behind a steaming blackened shell, the immediate crisis passed. Brandon, now visibly tired, lowered the empty extinguisher. He wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a smudge of ash on his skin. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the alley, then caught Milo's eye. Milo stood a few feet away, holding the remaining bottles of water, his posture still, his expression one of quiet concern. The smoke, now thinning, swirled between them, momentarily obscuring, then revealing their faces. In that hazy, charged space, something shifted. Brandon's usual professional detachment seemed to dissipate, replaced by a raw vulnerability that Milo had never witnessed before. His eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, held a weariness, a quiet burden that spoke volumes. Milo offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of silent acknowledgement. He didn't try to speak, didn't offer platitudes. He just held Brandon's gaze, a quiet anchor in the smoky aftermath. And in that exchange, across the still smoldering debris and the lingering smell of fire, Brandon found a strange, unexpected comfort. It wasn't pity or admiration for his bravery, but something deeper, a pure, unadulterated understanding. It was a recognition of the small, persistent battles that define a life, the unseen efforts, the quiet dedications. He saw the gentle concern in Milo's eyes, the genuine care that emanated from him like warmth from a hearth, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of his responsibilities, the daily grind of keeping order in a sometimes chaotic world, seemed to lessen. The soft crinkle at the corners of Milo's eyes, the slight downturn of his lips, conveyed a world of unspoken empathy. Brandon held the look for a beat longer than necessary, letting the silent current of connection wash over him. Then, with a subtle clench of his jaw, he broke the gaze, turning to speak to the firefighters, his professional mask sliding back into place. But the fleeting moment had imprinted itself, a gentle, indelible mark on the landscape of his mind. He'd glimpsed something rare, something profound, in Milo Thorne's quiet presence, a flicker of solace in the heart of the smoke, the confused retreat, the lingering aroma of Milo's sourdough, a ghost of yeasty comfort still clung to Brandon's uniform. A pleasant scent, perhaps, but a treacherous one. It was a problem, a significant one. That unexpected tightening in his gut when Milo's fingers had brushed his, the sudden warmth blooming in his chest at Milo's soft, unassuming smile. It was all wrong. Brandon was a cop, accustomed to the stark realities of shattered glass, screaming sirens, and the biting tang of smoke. He navigated the undeniable grit of the streets, not this simmering, unfamiliar heat that had nothing to do with adrenaline or danger. He'd caught himself more than once replaying their brief exchanges. The quiet cadence of Milo's voice, the way his eyes crinkled with genuine interest. A perilous distraction. His self-image was built on focus, on an almost surgical ability to compartmentalize. Yet Milo, with his gentle questions and flour-dusted hands, was seeping into every corner. It felt unmanly. This constant hum of another man's presence, this burgeoning tenderness in a space he usually reserved for patrol routes and suspect profiles. He wasn't a man given to such intense feelings, certainly not for another man. It was confusing, unsettling, and frankly, mortifying. So Brandon retreated. It wasn't a calculated decision, more an instinctual recalibration of his routine. The bakery, once a welcome deviation, transformed into a place to be actively circumvented. He began his morning shift minutes earlier, adding an extra 5 blocks to his drive. A deliberate detour around Elm Street. The familiar magnetic pull of the Daily Crumb's warmth still whispered, a persistent undercurrent he ruthlessly suppressed. Instead, he'd settle for convenience store coffee, lukewarm and acrid, and choke down pre-packaged muffins tasting of regret and cardboard. The quick, impersonal transactions suited him better now. No lingering eye contact, no accidental brushes of skin, no gentle smiles that twisted his insides into knots. His patrol routes shifted too, especially those that threaded past Milo's street. The old habit of a quick, reassuring glance at the bakery, a silent check that all was well, faded into oblivion. His gaze remained fixed on the road, on the indifferent storefronts, on anything but the inviting glow from the corner shop. It felt craven, but he couldn't risk that quiet, observant gaze, the tremor of something he couldn't name. Milo, with his characteristic perceptiveness, registered the shift acutely. The bakery, typically a symphony of morning bustle, now resonated with a peculiar emptiness. Brandon's absence was a palpable void, a missing thread in the day's familiar tapestry. His eyes drifted involuntarily toward the door, expecting the broad shoulders and steady stride of the officer, but he never materialized. The comforting blue uniform was gone, replaced by hurried commuters and the usual cast of regulars. Milo tried to rationalize it, a different shift, a new district perhaps, but a quiet unease settled in his stomach, a cool counterpoint to the warmth of his ovens. He recalled their last interaction, a simple conversation about the new rye bread. Had he misspoken? Was his reserved nature off-putting? He mentally replayed the conversation, sifting for an unnoticed slight, a conversational misstep. He was accustomed to the ebb and flow of clientele, yet Brandon had felt different. He'd felt significant in a way Milo hadn't fully grasped until now. The genuine concern in his eyes after the fire, the attentive way he'd listened to Milo describe his craft, it had all felt like a nascent beginning. Now, that something had vanished, leaving only a lingering question mark and the faint, unsettling suspicion that he had, unknowingly, driven him away. Despite its sweet smells and familiar sounds, the bakery felt a little colder without Brandon's quiet, watchful presence. Under the festival lights, the mingled scents of roasted nuts and sweet fried dough created a delicious, vibrant perfume, temporarily eclipsing the festival's ceaseless hum. Brandon, still in his patrol uniform, wove through the bustling thoroughfare, his attention divided between the joyous throngs and the familiar faces of his fellow officers. His late shift involved a routine watch, a peaceful vigil amidst the celebration. His gaze, habitually sharp and scanning for any hint of trouble, snagged on a brilliant splash of color near the venerable clock tower. Milo's stall, a cornucopia of artfully arranged tarts and delicate miniature cakes, shimmered under the warm glow of strung Edison bulbs. Milo himself, clad in a simple linen shirt that intensified the brilliance of his eyes, meticulously positioned a sugar-dusted croissant onto a display plate. The gentle light haloed the stray flower on his cheek, lending him an almost ethereal quality. Their eyes met across the shifting human current. Brandon's breath caught. Milo offered a small, tentative smile, a subtle upturn of his lips that sent a jolt of electricity through Brandon's chest. He felt an unfamiliar heat flush his neck, a warmth unrelated to the balmy summer evening. Brandon managed a curt nod, his attempt at professional detachment feeling stiff and insufficient, before compelling himself to move on, the vivid impression of Milo's smile burning behind his closed eyelids. Hours later, the festival lights still glittered, but the throngs had attenuated, their boisterous energy softening into a contented murmur. Brandon, finally relieved of duty, had traded his uniform for a well-worn denim jacket and a dark t-shirt. He told himself he was merely taking a final stroll, a way to decompress before heading home. Yet, his feet, seemingly possessing their own volition, gravitated back toward the clock tower. Milo was meticulously packing up, carefully swaddling leftover pastries in parchment and stacking empty display stands. His movements were precise, methodical, a quiet choreography of tidiness. The air surrounding his stall, once redolent with the robust aroma of baked goods, now held a faint, sweet afterscent, like a cherished memory. Brandon observed him for a long moment, the confession he knew he had to utter fluttering in his throat like a caged bird. The apprehension of rejection, of misinterpretation, formed a cold knot in his stomach, but the persistent image of Milo's earlier smile, that genuine warmth, propelled him forward. He approached slowly, the crunch of his boots on the gravel path resonating impossibly loud in the hushed air. Milo looked up, startled, his hands still resting on a wicker basket. His expression transitioned from surprise to a gentle curiosity. "Brandon?" Milo's voice was soft, a melodic counterpoint to the distant festival music. Brandon cleared his throat, his voice rougher than intended. "Hey, Milo." He thrust his hands into his pockets, suddenly acutely aware of the tremor in his fingers. "Looks like you had a good night." Milo offered a small shrug. "It was busy. Good, yes." He gestured to the nearly empty stall. "Almost everything's gone." A beat of silence stretched between them, punctuated by the lingering laughter of stragglers and the hum of generators winding down. Brandon's heart thrummed against his ribs, a frantic rhythm. This was it. No more room for denial, no more space for evasion. "Milo," he began, his voice barely a whisper, I have to tell you something." His gaze met Milo's, and he discerned a flicker of concern, of quiet understanding in those deep eyes. It lent him a fragile courage. He drew a shaky breath. I've been so disoriented lately, about everything, about myself." His voice fractured on the last word. "And it's all because of you." Milo's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he remained silent, his steady gaze a steadfast anchor in Brandon's tempestuous emotions. "I tried to ignore it," Brandon continued, the words now spilling out, a dam breaking. "I tried to pretend it wasn't real. But every time I see you, every time we talk, even just for a minute, it's like something shifts inside me." He took a step closer, the urgency in his voice intensifying. "You awaken feelings in me I never anticipated, feelings I didn't know I was capable of possessing." He reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently connecting with Milo's arm. The warmth of Milo's skin was a jolt, a grounding sensation. "Milo," he said, his voice raw with emotion, I know. I've fallen in love with you." The final words hung in the air, delicate and exposed, framed by the fading luminescence of the festival lights. Milo's eyes widened, a slow dawning of surprise and something else. something hopeful, blooming within them. He did not withdraw. He simply regarded Brandon, his expression unreadable yet undeniably present. The world seemed to hold its breath, awaiting.